Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yashvendra Singh, Executive Editor of ETCIO, and I welcome you all to the Economic Times Spectrum, a mega business and technology virtual CXO conclave. This innovative and extremely topical today event brings together top Indian and international business and technology leaders on a single forum. We have aptly themed the event as Reclaiming Growth Through Technology. At ETCIO, we firmly believe that as technology increasingly turns into the engine for growth, IT leaders will have to step up and help their organizations reclaim growth. They will have to show their CEOs a technology strategy that shortens the planning horizon to meet the next normal and promises longer-term growth. We also strongly believe that while the CIO will be in the driver's seat, the other C-level members in the enterprise will also have to maximize technology. The conclave will present a platform for CXOs to discuss strategies and come up with a blueprint that will help businesses reclaim growth fast in the post-COVID-19 world. Before we kickstart day one of perhaps India's biggest and most ambitious business and technology conclaves of 2020, I would like to extend a big thanks to our partners and sponsors for helping us create this wonderful event. I would like to thank presenting partners Aruba, an HPE company, and Reddington, powered by partner F5, gold partner ServiceNow, silver partners Druva, McAfee, Hitachi Vantara, and Raha Infotech, associate partners VM and IndusNet Technologies, exhibitor partner Neosoft, and event tech partner vConfex. As the event progresses, we suggest you also keep visiting the Resource Center for downloading various informative and valuable assets. Please feel free to visit the Help Center at the lobby to have your questions and queries answered. We also encourage you to stay with us throughout the course of the day through social media using hashtag ETCIO Spectrum. To unveil an amazing lineup of speakers, discussions, and chats, we would like to first invite Mr. Jeff Lanza, a former FBI agent. Mr. Lanza has investigated corruption, fraud, money laundering, and organized crime. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Jeff Lanza to deliver the keynote address.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Lanza, and it's a pleasure to talk to you today about the topic of cybercrime. I spent 20 years as an FBI agent, and for most of my career, I investigated white-collar crime. I wasn't involved in white-collar crime myself. But one major component of the FBI's white-collar crime program is cybercrime. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But in relation to the theme of your conference, it really has to do with growth, because if you're a company that's affected by cybercrime, possibilities for growth or diminishes, and also it's a major distraction for leadership and employees of a company to continue to grow when a cybercrime event occurs. Now, before I joined the FBI, way back when, many years ago, I got a master's degree in business from a school in the United States, University of Texas. And during that program, they taught me a lot about a successful company. To be a successful company, whether you're a small organization, a publicly held company, or a privately held organization, growth is so important. They always have to grow. And this is the kind of chart you want to have in an organization. But when there's a cybercrime event, it becomes very difficult to grow. It's a distraction, and it affects also customer relations with the company as well. Now, when this type of thing happens, it'd be really bad if it was an organization that was the target of an FBI investigation, and they're coming in seizing computers. But more often what we see is the FBI responds to an incident in the United States, and even outside the United States, where we work with partners, when we're showing up after a company has been victimized. And you never want this to happen again, because the distraction can go on for days, weeks, months, sometimes years, and it affects your ability to grow. Now, sometimes when these things happen, I get asked to go on TV, and this is a screenshot of me being interviewed a couple of years ago in the United States on a program called CNBC. And they asked me on the show about crime events when they happen. They try to get me to put some perspective on these events. But I always like to talk about it's too late to prevent these things from happening when it's already happened. The key here is prevention. I'm going to talk today about 3 significant crime events that could happen to an organization, the most common things that can happen, and then how to prevent them from happening as well. Now, if you want to look at a very recent event, this is a hack that occurred involving Twitter. You've probably heard about this hack. It was pretty well publicized. But here's the CEO of Twitter apologizing to his customers and to the community as a whole about the hack itself, but also how this hack affects the ability of customers to trust them. And this is not the first time, it's not the second time, it's not the third time Twitter had to apologize. You can Google it and see how many times Twitter has been the victim of hacks. They're a big target. But again, when the CEO is taking time to apologize to people, it's a distraction from what they're trying to do and continue to grow the business. And it's not just Twitter. Oh, we'll get to that in a second about other companies too. But the Twitter hack relied upon one key thing. We learned just a couple of days ago, one key thing that happened. It was social engineering. A teenager contacted somebody at Twitter and convinced them they were a Twitter employee, and they gained credential access through that social engineering, manipulation of this contact with this person to get that information. Amazing. All could have been prevented with maybe a little better customer education, not customer education, but employee education in this particular case. But Twitter's not the only target. When you have CEOs that have to go before Congress in the United States and testify about how they could have prevented potentially a 3 billion user account hack, the biggest one in history. Every single Yahoo user had their credentials taken by supposedly a Russian organization as well. The CEO eventually lost her job over that incident. And it's not just about companies being hacked, it's about how we prevent our customers from being victimized as well. Here's a guy in Canada who was paid by Russians, according to the charges against him, to hack into email accounts and to steal credentials and sell them to the Russians. From his home in Ontario, Canada, he used spear phishing emails to do that. It's an amazing story for one particular reason, besides the fact that the number of people were involved, but how much money he was paid to do the hacks and to get these credentials of people's email accounts. 11,000 he was responsible for that we know of, that he was charged with. At $100 each, he made over $1 million doing that. So there's lots of money involved in hacking as well. You can imagine the growth in this industry, in cybercrime. It's amazing to see the numbers and how this industry has grown in relation to hacks for individual users as well as companies. Target is a major department store chain in the United States. And a couple of years ago, a seminal event occurred. An event that occurred that had changed basically how we do things in the United States when we buy things at stores. Target has 1,828 stores in the United States with an average of 15 point-of-sale terminals, all right, cash registers, as they used to call them, at each of these stores. That's 27,000 terminals that were hacked by criminals. Very targeted hack, no pun intended, against Target. But each one of those systems, the criminals got malware that allowed them to skim off the credit card records. And it wasn't Target directly that was attacked. It was a third party. A mechanical contractor had access to Target's computers remotely. The criminals hacked into the third party, allowed them to get access to Target's computers, and eventually infiltrate 27,000 point of sale systems. And this has led to major changes. Now, I know in many other parts of the world, they've been using chip cards for a long time, credit cards with chips in them. The United States was reluctant to change over to that. We did after Target because of this incident. The CEO lost their job, and other people involved in technology at Target lost their job over this incident. They were trying to grow, increase the number of stores. That was a major impediment, this incident, to prevent them from doing that at the rate they wanted to do it. They're still feeling the effects of this today, 6 years later. Now, there's some reports out, a very recent report from Forrester indicates that about 40% of businesses have lost business due to cyber incidents. So the numbers are fairly large in that regard. And it's not just that they lose business. In some cases, it's the amount of money they lose, but also putting them out of business also could be an issue. There are small to medium-sized businesses that actually lost so much money or affected in one case by a ransomware attack in the United States where a company just closed up shop. They couldn't recover from ransomware. All right, we're going to get into all that in just a second, but I want to back up just a little bit and tell the story the right way. And I joined the FBI in 1988 This is a picture of me getting my official FBI credentials. You might be wondering, wait a minute, is that the same guy we're hearing from today? But that's me in 1988 getting my credentials, and I was sent to begin my FBI career in Kansas City, Missouri. It's one of the FBI's 56 field offices throughout the United States. When I got there, organized crime was a major focus of the FBI. We're talking about, traditionally in the United States, we call it the mafia, right? The Italian organized crime, the mafia. And many of those organized crime figures under investigation by the FBI, and one of them in Kansas City involved two guys named Tony, another guy named Joe. And please listen to this story carefully, because there's really an amazing lesson from this story. This really happened. You can't make this stuff up. So I'm in Kansas City. I'm sitting on a wire. It means we have a wiretap of a mobster's phone named Tony, and I'm listening to the phone. Tony gets a call from Joe. Now here's how the call goes. As we listen, Tony says to Joe, "Hey, Joe, I'm really glad you called." And Joe goes, "Yeah, why?" And Tony says, "I got a little problem. I think the FBI is tapping my phone." And Joe goes, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Tony says, "I got a new number." So listen to this. Without any common sense, Joe says, "Okay, good. Give me the number." Now, Tony has a little common sense, and he says, "I better not give it to you on the phone. I'll meet you for lunch, and I'll give it to you then." And Joe says, "Well, I can't meet you for lunch." Joe says, "Okay, I'll give it to you now on the phone, but I'll give it to you backwards." So we proceeded to give him these 7 digits in reverse order. What did the FBI do? We got our best cryptologists on that one right away. We had the number figured out in no time. It only took us 6 months with the powerful computers that we had back in 1988. But I tell that story because how important is common sense in everyday life? But when it comes to preventing scams, it's important too. Sometimes a little common sense goes a long way. Think about what happened at Twitter and the employee that gave up credentials to someone who said, a teenager, right, who said that they worked for the company and get access that way. Common sense will prevent a lot of these crimes from occurring as well. Now, when I joined the FBI in 1988, one of the reasons I joined the Bureau is I wanted to fight organized crime, and I got to work some of those cases. As a kid growing up, no, I wasn't around in 1933, but I did read books and saw movies about the gangsters of that era in 1933. And one of the things they did was they kidnapped people back then. They kidnapped them and held them for ransom. The kidnappings were so common in 1933 that there was a fill-in-the-blank ransom note that you see on the screen. It's a real one that was used in the 1930s. Just fill in the blanks and you have your completed document. And then, by the way, they also mentioned, hey, don't try to come after us because you'll never get your person back that we're holding for ransom alive. The threat was in there. And we don't see these kind of attacks today, but we see ransom attacks involving computers, which we'll get to. So hold that point for just a second. The mafia was a big target of the FBI back in 1988. Many years later, James Bolger was a mafia figure that was on the run for many years till the FBI finally got him. He's the first mafia organized crime figure to be put on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. And the FBI has a 10 most wanted list today, and includes a lot of really dangerous criminals, but they also have a cybercrime most wanted list. And here is that. On the FBI's website today, you can look at the most wanted criminals, 30 of most wanted criminals that are wanted for cyber crimes. And the problem is, they're not in the United States. They're all international. There's some other country, which makes it more difficult for the FBI to investigate the crimes without the cooperation of countries. In many cases, we don't get it, but also they may be working for the country itself. So there's no consequences. They're not arrested. There's no deterrence, and the crimes continue. And this is the crime problem we face here as well as worldwide, which we'll get to in just a second. One guy on that list, by the way, is responsible for $100 million in losses, according to the FBI's most wanted poster for him. He's a Russian. Why would Russia turn him over when he develops malware that steals bank login credentials, has stolen all this money that's poured into him and others? Why would Russia want the FBI to arrest him when he's pouring money into their economy? So again, the crime continues. Now, let's talk about the evolution and how we got to where we're at today. I'm going to talk about the 3 most common crimes that cyber criminals will commit against us, both small and medium-sized and large businesses, and then just a little bit about how to keep that from happening. So you proceed with your efforts at growth, right? And you don't have to worry about the distraction of being a victim of these cyber attacks. Now, back in the 1980s, as I mentioned, the FBI, their focus was against organized crime. One of the biggest cases that they ever fought investigated back in 1980, back in the late 1970s, actually, which led to more investigations in the 1980s. When the mobsters, they didn't steal money from a business, they didn't steal money from a bank. In this case, they stole money from an airport. JFK Airport, Lufthansa Terminal, $5 million in cash taken by one of the major crime families in the United States, the Bonanno crime family, one of 5 mafia families in New York responsible for this particular incident, with guns, masks, knives, and threats. The equivalent amount of money today, $17.2 million, adjusted for inflation. That's one of the cases, by the way, that got me interested in becoming an FBI agent when I was just a teenager back in 1978. But that was the focus of the FBI for many years, organized crime. Now, in the 1990s, roughly, things changed. Drugs became a major focus of the FBI, cocaine trafficking and other types of drugs, along with many other U.S. federal agencies. Anti-drug efforts, major focus, late 80s and into the 1990s. And of course, an event in early 2000 decade changed everything again, and the focus of anti-crime efforts became counterterrorism in most departments throughout the United States, and federal, state, and local agencies and worldwide agencies focusing on preventing further terrorist attacks. Now, while that was going on, a very interesting was happening with computers. They were starting to be used more in the mainstream by individuals doing all sorts of things like banking, and businesses were using them as well. Credit card processing at institutions and stores were now turning to the internet to communicate. And that's when this guy started to get involved in some of his cyber attacks. Now, he was in the United States and he was arrested. He broke into the point of sale systems in about 25 different organizations because the security was weak when they first started using the internet to do these transactions. And he took advantage of that. And while the effort for law enforcement was more focused on counterterrorism, there was an opening for someone like him. So when companies started to fortify their defenses against his type of crime, computer intrusions, right, then the criminals said, okay, if you're not going to let us intrude directly into your computer systems, they still occurred, Target, of course, is a major example, but it was harder for the criminals. So we're not going to be able to break into your computer. We'll just get you to transfer the money yourselves, and or we'll transfer it for you. In this particular case, bank account takeovers became a major crime. Where I worked in the Kansas City office of the FBI, about in the middle of the United States, not far from there in Springfield, Missouri, we had a case where money was transferred out of a bank account by criminals. They got the bank login credentials through social engineering, simply sending an email to someone who logged into a fake bank account. They transferred $440,000 in one wire transfer to Cyprus. Now you're thinking, why Cyprus? Cyprus is not usually a country that we hear about when it comes to cybercrime. Well, you do hear about it if you look at money laundering, because of all the countries in the world, Cyprus is last on the list in terms of their money laundering standards, their money laundering notifications when money moves, right? And law enforcement doesn't usually look at things in Cyprus because they don't know about it. So maybe that's why it was sent there first and then maybe distributed to other parts of the country. One wire transfer, $440,000. And then companies said, wait a minute, we're too easy. It's too easy to do this. So then they started fortifying their defenses against these type of attacks where they actually transferred money directly from bank accounts, bank account takeovers. So then the criminal said, okay, if you're not going to let us hack into your bank accounts with stolen credentials, all right, what we'll do is we'll just get you to transfer the money for us. And I'll get to that one in a second. But I want to mention this as well. This is one of the biggest wire transfers ever. In fact, it is fraudulent wire transfer when $100 million plus was taken from the Bank of Bangladesh. This was under control of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, but with stolen credentials on a weekend when less people will be looking at the transfer request. $101 million was taken. $20 million was recovered. The rest was lost, still not recovered to this day. This occurred in 2016. Again, stolen credentials, wire transfer. And it would have been $1 billion loss, except that the person requesting the money, the criminal, spelt one word incorrectly in the wire transfer request. Instead of using the word foundation, he spelt it fandation. And someone at the Fed saw the misspelled words and looked at it more skeptically, and then decided to stop all the wire transfers before more money went out. A total of $1 billion would have been lost if the word had been spelled correctly. Wire transfer, bank account fraud, big problem, 2010, all the way till very recently, in this case, 2016. So as I started to say, then the criminals, it was more difficult for the criminals to do things like this. So then they said, okay, we'll just get you to transfer the money for us. So they committed what's called bank account CEO fraud, spoofing the boss. This is a real email that was sent from someone looking like it was the CEO in China sending a wire transfer request to a controller at the company who basically paid attention to the instructions and sent $17.2 million to China in a couple of different wire transfers. This is one of the biggest cases involved. As an example of this type of thing, many companies have lost a lot of money doing the same thing, not as much, but a big one here, not recoverable. By the time they figured it out, it was too late to get the money back. CEO fraud, spoofing the boss. And then the criminals said, okay, as you hardened the defenses against that type of crime, people started getting, it still happens today, but they started figuring this out and made it more difficult for criminals to get the money that way. The criminals had to mutate, right? They always mutate. It's like a virus. They mutate the way they attack us in order to get around our defenses, right? So then they said, okay, if we can't take money this way, we're going to go back to another indirect method. We'll just not intrude on your computers, not have a computer intrusion case. We're just going to hold your computers hostage, or the files on your computers hostage. So you can't do business unless you pay us a ransom. Now, ransomware didn't start in 2020. It didn't start this year. It's been around for a while, but it started to come into vogue in the last couple of years or so, and it continues today. And some of these ransom notes, like you see on the screen, there's even a countdown clock that tells you you're running out of time unless you pay the money. Now, ransomware began a long time ago, but it's become more significant today, and companies are being affected by this to a great extent, not because of the ransom that needs to be paid, even if they paid the ransom. It's the downtime, right? How are you going to grow a company when you can't even produce what you're trying to produce that particular day because of downtime? And not only that day, but the after effects of that. Merck, major pharmaceutical company, the loss was related to production expenses, remediation expenses. You see the headline, over $1 billion, right? Now that wasn't a targeted attack. That was the result of the WannaCry and Petya ransomware attacks that affect Merck and other companies at that time. Actually, a tool that was stolen from the United States, I don't know, it got out there somehow, that the National Security Administration used to use to spy on people and organizations, called Eternal Blue. Somehow it got out into the public domain, and that was used to launch the WannaCry ransomware attack. First time the internet was used to spread a ransomware attack. It's a non-targeted attack. It went after anybody who was victimized, who didn't update their Windows software appropriately, and it spread, starting in West Africa, spread throughout the world in a matter of minutes. That was the WannaCry ransomware attack. Petya followed a little bit after that. Then there was Petya 2, and it affected not just companies in the United States, but others as well throughout the world. And particularly vulnerable for targeted attacks, right, were hospitals. The total loss to Merck in this case was $1 billion, right? TNT Express, a subsidiary of Federal Express, was attacked by Petya. Their loss was in the hundreds of millions of dollars as well. And the Petya and WannaCry ransomware attack cost companies billions on a worldwide basis. And then there was a targeted attacks. And targeted attacks, I started to mention hospitals. They became a major focus because who's more likely to pay money in a ransomware attack than a hospital when you have issues involving patients and issues involving the healthcare of individuals in that hospital? This was another seminal event, a major watershed event when it comes to targeted attacks, because the company, the hospital that was victimized by this, not only did they pay the money, they didn't do it quietly. They publicly announced that they were paying ransom to the criminals, and that just encourages criminals to commit this behavior and emboldens them to do even more attacks. And it gets the non-professional ransom or criminals involved as well that don't know much about it, and maybe they don't even know how to return your files to you through the encryption codes if they wanted to. Another issue that happens sometimes today when we get amateurs attacking us. Anyway, they paid the money, encouraged the behavior. And now today, that was 2016, and today we see even more attacks against hospitals. Why? They're more likely to pay the money. In the time of crisis today, they're even more likely to potentially pay because of what's going on with COVID. If I could sum up in one statement. Now, these are many statements that have been said about hospital attacks, but if you look to the right of the screen, top right, if you can sum up all the statements in one thing, it's not safe to be in a hospital as a patient when their computers are down, and hence the attacks against hospitals. They know they're more likely to pay. Others likely to pay, schools. Imagine being an administrator in a school district and trying to tell parents of children in your school that it wasn't your child's records that were taken by the criminals. They were just held hostage by the criminals. And explaining that to parents, more likely to pay, maybe to keep it quiet, or maybe just to get the records back so it doesn't become an issue. And if you're not a hospital or a school, there's other organizations that are victimized as well throughout the world. This is not just a United States thing. As I mentioned, you're well aware of some of the cases in Australia, in Asia. And then we have, of course, a major company that's involved in logistics, right? And those particular companies as well are big targets because of the supply chain. And they know how important it is that they pay money to get their files back and to get up and running again because of the downstream effects of their attacks. And no one ever wants to revert to manual. When you're doing that, you're in trouble. So let's see how the attack occurs, and I'm going to talk about 3 ways to prevent these attacks from occurring. All 3 methods, including ransomware. The attack occurs something like this in a ransomware attack. You know, someone clicks on the wrong thing, right? It's just social engineering using electronics. They think they're going to be looking at a document. There's a macro, it downloads the malware from a remote host, hence the attack begins. It can be as simple as that. Sometimes they'll try to trick us and trick email systems that scan for viruses, all right, or scan for potential malware by putting a password in the email. That wouldn't make sense. Remember the role of common sense here? If you looked at this and you said, why would someone send me a document that has the password to this document in the email? No, you would send that another way. The criminals trying to get the email scanning systems, right, that scans for malware, to not open that document, not to look at it and see that it contains malware. They can't open it if there's a password to the document. So it gets around that, but the person receiving it didn't realize it didn't make sense, so they clicked on it anyway, and it downloaded the payload of malware to the computer. Could happen that way too. Just an example. Sometimes it's a malware that's sent through resumes to people in human resources departments. I've seen many examples of that. Once you click on the wrong thing, this is one example of how it happens. There's other ways it can happen, but the encryption occurs, and all of a sudden you see encrypted files on your computer, and IT has a problem. How to get back up and running when you have all your files encrypted. Then you're notified by the criminals. What happens to your files? They've been encrypted, and if you want to get the description or education on asymmetric encryption and public key cryptography, yeah, they'll give it to you if you want, but you don't have time for that because you want to get up and running again. And then there's the demand. And here's where the criminals are nice. They're friendly about this. They're all nice, by the way. They say please and they say thank you. All they want is your money. They give you 2 options for payment. You can make one payment that would for each computer that's been infected, or you can make one payment that gives you a volume discount. Right? You get all of them unencrypted for one payment. Nice. It's nice they give us that volume discount offer. And they also, just like the criminals back in the 1930s that used to say, don't call the police because you're not going to be able to catch us. They say the same thing. Don't try to follow us. We're covering our tracks, right? And we're also concerned about your privacy. Isn't that nice of them? Just in case you were worried, don't worry. Your privacy is not an issue here. Then you pay the money and they'll even tell you, thank you, enjoy, get your files back up and running. You wish it were as easy as that, right? Then you have the remediation cost and trying to figure out how it happened, and also trying to get up and running again to the extent that you were before, a major impediment to growth. And sometimes they'll even send, because customer satisfaction is so important for everything today, and customer reviews. Who does business without good, positive customer reviews? You may even get an email like this. It's almost got to that point, right? See, the thing about ransomware attacks is they don't just go after the main computer systems, your operating systems, they go after the backups as well. So not just your working files, they encrypt the backup data, right? Because they know if you can recover from the backup, you're not going to pay the ransom. So in Canada, they paid over $400,000 because the criminals went after the backup first. This is an important component of prevention. We'll talk about that in a second. A hospital in New York State was victimized by a ransomware attack. Right? The criminals didn't just victimize the production files, they went after the backup first. I'll show you that in a second. They're affected by strong encryption, as you can see from this ransomware note, the real note that was sent to the hospital. Right? Again, they're giving them a volume discount. Isn't that nice, right? You don't have to pay for every system we've encrypted. Just pay one. We'll give you the key for all the systems infected. Reverting to manual. Can you imagine being a hospital, having patients in a hospital, even during non-COVID times, right? And trying to do things like you did in the 1960s, writing prescriptions by hand, not being able to enter patients' records. What happened in this case was very simple. The criminals found an exposed remote desktop protocol. They used brute force to guess a password, and they got into the systems that way. They deleted the backups first. They were smart about it because if you delete the backups, nothing to recover from. And the hospitals were forced to recover from any way they could or pay the ransom. So this is the system the situation they were in. You can imagine being a hospital having patients in a situation like this. So the question often is asked to people and the FBI when they show up at these events is, should we just pay? And the FBI will say, no, never pay, because that just encourages the hackers, because they'll just embolden them, right? So TravelX, a big company, recently, this is just from a few months ago, paid $2 million. But here's what's happened if you pay, right? You encourage the criminals. Number one, first of all, you don't even necessarily get your files back. There's no guarantee you're going to be able to recover your files. You're put on a payers list, and unless you fix things fast, you may be attacked again because they know you're going to pay. We want to be put on a non-payers list. That's what we want as a company, so they won't attack us. They know we won't pay. It just encourages the behavior as well. And one more thing about this. One more thing. Let me talk about the profit of worldwide criminal enterprises. Drugs is the number one in terms of profit generated. Counterfeiting is two. Human trafficking is up there. Cybercrime is up there. $12 billion ransomware alone, just one part of cybercrime, and it's expected to be much greater in the next year. And this is just the ransom that is paid. It has nothing to do with the downtime and the remediation costs that the companies may be involved in as well. But where does the money go if you were to pay a ransom? Where's this $21 billion going to go in this predicted cost of ransom being paid to criminals? You know what? In many cases, it goes in their pockets, but in many cases, this is well proven by other crimes as well, it goes to fund other criminal enterprises. And who wants to be involved in that? It's almost like we're complicit in that. If we're sending money to criminals to get our computers back and they're using it to fund other criminal enterprises, we become part of that. We don't want to let that happen. So prevention is the key. So let me talk about the three crimes that we mentioned, and very briefly, some simple things we can do to prevent it from happening. I talked about bank account takeovers, educating employees, where to click, watch out for emails from unknown or suspicious senders. Don't log in on in links from those emails. Using technology. Technology is so important. We'll talk about that in a second. Banks have controls. Banks have software to prevent these things from happening. Alert mechanisms so we know when money moves in case we do get victimized as well. A technology, let me just give you one example that you can ponder. You can noodle this over in your brain, how important technology is to prevent crime. All right? New York City, major problem with auto thefts. In the 1990s, believe it or not, in that year alone, 1 year, not a decade, 1990, 147,000 auto thefts on the streets of New York City. 400 a day. Who's even investigating the crimes? Police don't have time. 400 cars stolen a day in one city. But then everything changed when technology came to use. And over the years, we started using the key fobs instead of just playing keys, right? And the technology caused a drop in the crime. Now down to 14 a day in 2017, at least. Just comparing those numbers over that period of time. No more will we use these keys as cars were being phased out. These keys are being phased out when new cars came into being. Now we have the key fob. Imagine the effect on technology and this cost savings that technology was incurred for the police departments as well as insurance companies, which ultimately gets passed on to us, right? Technology, always think about what technology can do to help prevent crime. So let's get back to CEO fraud, which is the second crime I talked about. 17,000 victims across the world, not just in the United States. Lots of money lost since 2013, right? How do we prevent CEO fraud? This particular crime alone, how do we prevent it from happening? Easy, right? How about using two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication when you log into your email accounts? Prevents email account hijacking. How about IT people setting up filters so we don't get emails from people, we don't even see them if they don't have the right domain exactly. Now, they could still be hijacked, but it'll prevent the domain spoofing or rearranging letters to make it look like the real domain, which is a very common way criminals do that as well. Set up filters so the executives don't even get these, where they can be asked to transfer money. And then how about picking up the phone when you're going to transfer $17.2 million? Hey, just making sure that it's you requesting this money, as an example. Just call people. Simple thing we can do. How to prevent ransomware attacks? Good, better, and best. Good, you see on the left part of your screen. Better is to back up your files, but you have to back them up effectively so they can't be attacked by the criminals before they actually attack the production files. So the best is to have an air-gapped backup. Your IT professionals should know what this is and how we can implement it to keep our files safe. They're an immutable copy of your files, so they can't be attacked. You can always recover from those files in the event that you're attacked by a ransomware attack. And then also, just in general, 3-2-1 strategy: 3 backups, 2 medium, 1 offsite, an immutable copy that can't be accessed by the criminals. So this is the crime problem we're facing today, right? We have 30 of the world's top cyber criminals. They're not being caught. There's no consequences. There's no deterrence, and the crimes go on. But we can prevent it by doing simple things in our own organizations to keep us safe and continue on our path to growth in an organization that you desire. And then you don't want to be in a situation where you have a distraction, where you're dealing with apologies, when you're dealing with the aftermath of an attack like Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, is still today. It's a major distraction to our growth and to the way we operate our company. So with that, I'm just going to leave it there and say thank you for listening. Thank you for the attention that you've given this program today. If you want to get in contact with me, that's my email address. My website is on the screen as well. You can send me messages if you're interested in talking to me about any of the stuff we talked about today. I'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to present to you virtually, and I hope maybe someday we can get together in the future and do this in person. Hopefully that will occur sooner than later. We can hope for that. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being involved in this virtual session for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lanza, for those insights.